I see you right now, you're sitting at home, you're thinking about getting some huge muscles, and you're saying, what type of program should I use? You're confused. There's nerds that are talking about nerd stuff and pointing at nerd papers, and you think you should listen to the nerds, and there's big giant guys that say, look at my muscles, and you feel like you should listen to them. You have come to the right place, because as you will see here, I am talking about the perfect program, not the okay program or the decent program, but the perfect program. The other thing you'll see here is this thing called part 2. If you guys are new here, that means there's a part 1. We're gonna link it up here somewhere. If I point every direction, we'll definitely get it. So if you want this one to make full sense, go check out that one first. But if you're a weirdo and you just like to pick up halfway through and see how things go, you're more than welcome to it as well. So going through real quick, this is some of the stuff you missed in part 1. So we're gonna discuss the variables. This is kind of how this is put together, is this idea of what makes the perfect program. A program is basically all on paper stuff. So the things that you're gonna skip here are some of these on the paper things, and the most important variable by far, so go back and watch video number 1 where I talk about the on paper stuff is actually the smaller part of what makes up results. So again, I'm not taking a poo-poo on my perfect program, but again, all jokes aside, I like the idea of giving people a place to start. I like the idea of directing people to an intelligently designed program, but realize the majority of it is up to how you do it will always be much more important than what specifically you do. For this video, the things that we didn't discuss in part 1 are gonna be proximity to failure, volume, that's a fun one, rest time, rep ranges, intensifiers. This is, in case you're new here as well too, you get what you sign up for. I actually made this slide, so you see intensifiers is supposed to be in quotes, but as you'll notice over here, we got an extra quote hanging out there. So as I spot errors going along the way, I'll just point them out. So if someone wants to get in the comment section, be like, you got an error there. I'm the hypertrophy coach. I'm not the grammar coach. I'm sure this is riddled with spelling and grammatical errors and all sorts of messed up stuff. But also over here, I will sprinkle in pictures of my muscles here and there that don't quite look like that anymore. People say, well, you're bigger. You need to be bigger. And back then I was bigger. Does that mean I was smarter back then? I paid for a lot more education, have a lot more experience since then. Yet somehow I've gotten dumber. Is my brain in my muscles? I don't know. You guys explain that to me in the comment section. I'm all ears. So moving on, look at it. Here's some more social proof. Look, I can see some muscles, and I'm pointing at another guy with muscles. So that's my whole blend here. We're trying to have, if I was saying you're debating, do you listen to the meathead or the nerd? I'm all about balancing both. That's my deal. So proximity to failure. Here's a big concept. I just like to use this pen. I don't really have to do that. But this will kind of go through a whole lot of principles within the training world. And this is probably the most intelligent thing you guys could learn with a lot of variables, but also the thing people like to do the least, because as little as possible to produce maximal results, someone says, oh, well, just tell me the exact number. Because the exact number doesn't actually have this part in there, results. And that's what you guys should be doing, is when you implement something, you should actually track and measure the results. So when you use all these things like proximity to failure, volume, I'm gonna give you guardrails in case you guys missed in the beginning why I'm not citing 8 million things of research, is I'm taking the generalities that we know from research now and looking at the evidence of actually having trained people and giving you some good guardrails for your training. But at the end of the day, it falls on you. There can definitely be different variables here. They're gonna have a different response for people, which we'll discuss on. So the whole thing here is, first and foremost, get these couple concepts. As you move further from failure to closer to failure, I don't know if that makes sense when I wrote it, reps become more stimulating, right? So if I pick a weight and I can do 10 reps to failure and I stop at 3 reps, or I go all the way to 10 reps, it's a pretty good argument that doing those 10 reps, again, the same weight, is gonna be more effective of a set than I just quit at 3, 7 reps short of failure. So just get that general concept. Don't fixate on exact numbers or exact amounts. That's a concept which from what the nerds think and what we have from research, as well as what's actually been trained for decades and decades before I was training, seems to be pretty much, hey, that's true. The other thing to be aware of is as you move further from failure to closer to failure, so same thing, as we get closer to failure, reps become more fatiguing. So it is absolutely true if I stop. So this is what research does sometimes, and people are so, I kind of picked on research first, is you could do a whole study that says, hey, my example I just gave, every single set, they pick your 10 rep max and they stop at 3 reps short of failure. Or excuse me, they stop at 3 reps, 7 reps short of failure. Or on the other side of the study, they do everything all the way to failure. And let's say we look at just the fatigue component. And so we find out, we do this study and we say, hey, guess what? When you stop at 3 reps, 7 reps short of failure, it's less fatiguing. So for mitigating fatigue, everyone should stay 7 reps short of failure. And there's literally where people will compare 2 variables like that and make these claims, and people will run with that within their training. So that's one example, but pay attention to what some research actually does. It doesn't actually look at how lots of people are applying it. It looks at the extremes to try and determine which is better or more or less of these 2 variables. So basically the whole goal here is this. I'm going to underline it again because it's important, and then I'll move it out of the way. I'm going to circle this one. Now we're really moving up. The goal is balance. Balance. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this. We're going to circle balance. That's more important. Balance the benefit of the stimulus versus the cost, the fatigue. And honestly, this is for hard training individuals, for people that are actually muscular, for people that have actually produced a good amount of results. This is a huge deal. Now, again, the funny thing is a lot of people are putting out great information on this. Like I said, some of those guys that I referenced in video 1 are putting out really good physiology stuff. We should be aware of this stuff, that balancing this is very important, because too much fatigue will reduce your ability to produce stimulus, maybe not just even within the workout, but long-term over the course of your split in your program. So balance is a huge thing here. The funny thing though is a lot of people, again, people try and fixate on things sometimes, unfortunately, that let them work less hard. And so you get a lot of people that are not really training that hard, don't have that much muscle, and they're like, oh, fatigue management, that's a big deal and that's important. And in reality, they should probably focus on taking most of their variables in training as stimulating as humanly possible, because even their idea of how close am I to failure might actually be way shorter than they really are, how far they're taking sets, how good or bad their form may be. They might have a whole host of things where, hey man, anything we can do to get more stimulus on you is going to be the big thing. So as with everything, balance here is a bigger deal the more advanced you get, but something that everybody should be aware of. And so going here, the couple things that I want to highlight here is there really is no clear-cut, put line in the sand. Some people will say, well, don't go all the way to failure because that last rep is not worth the fatigue and it's maybe not more stimulus. I don't think we have any clear evidence that implies that. And all that I'm saying with that is, of the factors, which I'll kind of hop down here, of things that really equate to being more stimulating, more motor unit recruitment, ideally more intramuscular force production, is going to be to your relative load. So if you just pick heavy enough loads that you can only do, let's say, six reps or less, all your sets are going to include a lot of effective reps. All that being said, is one of the big factors is unintentional rep speed. And so that's a big thing that happens. Why does people say, what changes if the load stays the same? If we're doing, again, that 10 rep max or whatever, it's the same load all the way from rep 1 to rep 10. Well, one of the big factors is the reps get slower and slower as you get closer to failure. And as long as slow rep speed is a factor in producing more intramuscular force or having more stimulus, that's always going to be the slowest reps are the last ones right up to failure. So it is accurate. Again, if we're looking at, again, that same thing, if I either stop, with that 10 rep load, if I stop at 6 reps, to pick up some effective reps, or I go all the way to 10 reps to failure, that 10th rep, in my opinion, is more stimulating than that 6th rep because it is always done at a slower pace. And so all that being said is, I don't know what rep you would arbitrarily say, hey, this one, because it's closest to failure, had more fatigue than the other ones and also didn't come with more stimulus. I think in general, they're always going to go hand in hand. The reps that are more stimulating are also going to be more fatiguing. But again, you got to balance those things out. And so again, this whole 5 rep thing, if you're new here, one of the guys I referenced in video 1 is Chris Beardsley. I literally was putting his stuff. I have a huge educational part on my app called Hypertrophy Coach University that's now a separate thing. And within that, I referenced him, this is almost 5 years ago at this point in time, because he's one of my favorite physiology guys. And again, I think he's had that for around 5 years now, as this effective rep theory. So you'll see me talk a lot about these kind of last 5 reps. The whole thing to be aware of with that is I think it's a great framework just so it can kind of talk about some of the same stuff and use some sort of guideline. But again, it's a guide, it's not a rule. Does that mean 6 reps short of failure is never effective? No, but it's just something that, again, as we're getting closer to failure, things generally become more effective. And the example of this where you can actually see this once you've trained human beings, there are outliers in the bodybuilding world. So there's literally like a genetic elite that for whatever reason can stay 7, 8, 9 reps short of failure all the time, and they actually keep growing. And again, it's aside from something that's just drugs. Yes, that could be a part of it. But also when you train normal people, elderly populations, I mean, I've had clients that are 70, 80, 90 plus that I don't even know what type of reps in reserve would be left with certain sets, because there's a whole host of other things aside from when you have a brand new person, especially an older demographic, you want to stay 20 reps short of failure because any amount of stimulus is going to be so much more than what they've done before. You don't want to actually like literally break them. But then also there's orthopedic issues, there's other stuff there where I've had people where I would say consistently, we are always well short of 5 reps, not just initially when we start, but literally for months and months and months and months on end, we're going nowhere near failure. And again, maybe not even with those last 5 reps, but they've still been able to produce results where I can actually see increases in strength, increases in muscle tissue, improvement in composition. So there's some demographics where even if we're not within those last 5 reps, you can still get benefit and they can still be stimulating. So get the idea. For most people watching this, the more advanced you are, especially a normal person, your main goal is to keep building muscle, not just 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. The 5 reps is a good gauge, and I think that's a really good thing that it was created for. So if I'm gonna actually get some recommendations, because everyone's like, hey, I don't wanna hear all that nonsense, just tell me numbers. In general, if we're gonna have a place that makes a little bit more sense, and this is outside of demographics. So again, this should always be the goal. So the newer you are, probably the more reps in reserve you can leave and still produce results. So demographic as far as age, training age makes a big difference as well too. But just for kind of everyone watching this, I'm assuming a little bit more in that intermediate realm or advanced. For your bigger movements using heavier loads is what I mean by bigger. You're gonna do a deadlift, a squat pattern. Those are the places I think it can make more sense to leave more reps in reserve. So maybe 1 to 2 reps in reserve realistically for most people. And for smaller movements where the loads tend to be lighter, you're doing a bicep curl, whatever it is, those are places where you can get a little bit closer to failure because the amount of fatigue also will be somewhat directly correlated to the load you're using, the amount of tissue you're using as well too. So again, when we're really kind of doing this benefit of balancing those things, from a practical programming standpoint, I don't think I've ever had people that it's like, oh, we've built so much excessive fatigue that their whole program's going off the rails and they're unable to train really hard because they're doing too many forearm curls to failure, right? So these are things, bigger movements, heavier loads, larger individuals, more tissue is when that really is a thing that you have to be a little bit more aware of in programming. Where again, if it's smaller movements, not as heavier loads, there's not going to be as much of that very delicate balancing act. But still, the culmination of all of that does add into your program to a certain degree. And I always just have a note here of beyond failure, since we're talking about proximity to failure. Some people really get stirred up with this, saying this is a bunch of nonsense. You can't go beyond failure. It's just a made-up term, right? It's just a name. All names are made-up things, right? If we look at what names are. And I think it's just what most people talk about. So we've actually, if someone has hit task failure, anything that happens beyond that is just someone calls beyond failure, all right? But what really is beyond failure? In general, there's 2 to maybe 3 things. I'm just going to touch on the 2 big ones here. But really, beyond failure is just less weight for either the entire range of motion. So it's just basically if you have someone, if you do your last on your bench press, you get the last one up and you can't do the rep at any point in time, and your training partner grabs it and helps a little bit the whole way. So if you did 200 pounds all by yourself, and then the next rep, the person takes 10, off the whole way up. So 10 pounds lifting the whole way up. You didn't do 200 pounds beyond failure, you did 190 pounds for your next rep. So some of it is basically just a modified drop set, which I'm not saying anything good or bad one way or the other. And then some of it is just for range of motion specific. So you do an exercise, and let's say hypothetically it's a bicep curl, you get to the point where you just barely finish up here, and then the next rep, you can get all this part by yourself, but you get stuck there, and then your training partner pushes through just a little bit. You are still managing the entire load for some of the range of motion, but for the entire task, you might have an additional spot through part of the range of motion. And that's where this is really more of a loading pattern, technically is what we're talking about, but for how people use terms on the internet, it's kind of like a profile adjustment type thing. And so again, all of these things are to be aware of. We'll talk a little bit, I talked about it kind of in video 1 if you wanted. Anytime you're getting closer to failure and anytime you're extending a set, things like that, whatever you want to call this, there is always going to be more fatigue associated with that. You will absolutely get some more stimulus. And these are things I basically kind of leave up to, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in intensifiers, I'll leave up to the individual as far as, is the juice worth the squeeze? I'm actually going to save that for the next slide. So I just wanted to touch on the nomenclature here a little bit. Again, if people use it so we know what we're talking about, fine. And the other thing, again, could just be basically a version I could have put 2.5. I said kind of 3 would be just like partial. So with the curl example, if you didn't have a spotter, well, you can still do the entire load sometimes for more reps, just in a partial range of motion. And when there's kind of a little interesting thing about why do people hit failure, some of it is brain limited, but some of it on exercises, we can clearly measure, 1, you have different force production capabilities through the range of motion, and then 2, the actual torque that you have at the joint is different as you go through the range of motion, depending on almost any exercise as well too. So there's a couple factors that, 1, cause people to stop. A lot of it is, in my opinion, brain limited for lack of a better term. but force application has to be a part of it as well too. Maybe a little bit more nerdy than our conversation is necessary today. Volume, this is a fun one. This is like people want to fight about this one, and I'm just gonna come out and say, so first off, this is the part that nobody likes. That's volume. How do you figure out your volume? That is the #1 guideline. People don't like that because they want me to tell you numbers. Relax, look down here, there's numbers. You can even jump ahead and look at them and say 1 to 16, that's really helpful, Joe. I'll get there, relax. But nobody likes this because like I said, the volume debate, because that is the stupid thing, I'm gonna keep using this, debate. Oh, maybe we'll do an asterisk by this one. Let's mix it up, or a star. Star. The volume debate, because it shouldn't even be a debate, is so easy to win, and by I said win, is being just find out what works best for you. But the whole thing, if you're gonna write some notes, hopefully you're all taking notes. I'm sure you're all at home taking notes. Some of you taking notes while you're pooping. Don't do that, that's gross. You're getting germs everywhere. Go wash your hands and then take notes. But in general, the volume debate, this is definitely worth underlining, is a massive time suck. Most of the time, this is for people that like to debate this and argue this. They like to get in comment sections. They get really excited when there's a study that points out their bias. Look, this study showed that 8 million sets is better than 1 set. And someone else says, look, 1 set's better than 8 million. They get all excited about it. These are people that are generally the paralysis by analysis. They like talking more than they generally like doing. So please, if you're in that camp and you want to have big muscles, get out of that camp. And for everyone else that's a normal person that just wants big muscles, this slide's not that important. And so basically all I mean by that is test different amounts. That's the whole thing. Nobody tracks and measures stuff. Basically, they just want to say test different amounts. And I think there is a little bit, I'll give you some guidelines here, but they're absolutely for a whole host of reasons. Because again, how you do a rep, I've done a whole different video. Maybe we'll try and link this one up here. We'll try and find it. I think I have one on here. If you haven't, look up circle rep principle. So it's a free video. It's on YouTube. I've got it up somewhere, circle rep principle. But that's a good one to watch. And the whole point of that video is what people call 1 rep. Talking about volume is lots of times useless because the industry has done a bad job of standardizing what 1 rep is. So if you think about that, all the volume is off of that base metric, 1 rep. If we don't establish what 1 rep is, everything that comes after that base metric is stupid. And I literally think that that 1 rep, depending on the individual, how they do that, the exercise they choose, the profile of the exercise, the bracing of it, and a whole bunch of factors, it can literally be 10 times different from one person. That's literally 10 times. Go watch that video. I won't get off on the side ramble on that one. So anyway, that's why I think we can actually have a range where I think someone can work really, really well with a little bit lower volume, someone maybe a little bit higher of that. But in general, what you want to avoid is the extremes. And this is where people, like, there's absurdity of extremes where, again, literally a study will come out and say, based on this study, we show that you keep getting more, benefit as you go higher and higher and higher and higher volume and doing 1 million sets a week. And the reality is, if you've actually trained people, you've actually trained yourself, like logically that makes no sense, because I mean, really, how are they measuring this? How are they tracking this? People that are a little bit more into physiology than me that say, well, what are we actually showing that gets bigger up to that point in time? Probably just edema as what's getting bigger because that's part of your lean tissue if we're measuring it that way. But the reality is, what's the main way to do this? So let me see. Oh, I meant to say here, find out which is best for you, period. And I did this double. So I wrote the word period and I actually used a period. End of story. Debate, end of story. There's that, kind of went ahead of that. But what's really the way that you test it? The big way that you test it is what do you progress better on? And so that's if someone's watching this whole time, get to the point, Joe, how do I progress? You progress and you use this, here's what I'm kind of getting all over the place. I don't know, I've changed that. Is use the favorite exercise progression example. What I mean by that is go ahead and right now, take a pause where you're pooping, write it on some toilet paper, and list out your favorite exercise per body part. And I'm really favorite. Don't think what your favorite, the nerd says, what are your favorite ones? So let's say somebody you at home went and said, hey, my favorite for chest is incline dumbbell. And right now some nerd's saying, it's not stable, it's bad for hypertrophy, and they're small and they suck, and you keep doing your incline dumbbells. But let's say right now you can do 50s for 10. Great. Whatever amount of volume allows you to get to 100 pounds for 10, the fastest, is the best volume for you. That's period, that's end of story, that's end of debate. I'm gonna circle again. That's period, written, and with an actual period itself. And so that's really, you have to test that and you kind of have to figure out, because when we talk about someone saying, hey, we show that 10 sets per week, 20 sets per week, 30 sets per week, 40, 50 sets per week, keep showing more hypertrophy. Logically, if you've ever trained someone for more than a year, 5 years, 10 years, that's idiotic. you know there's no way to manage that from an actual programming standpoint. And when I've actually looked at people, the strongest correlation will be what takes you, what progressive overloads you within standardized hypertrophy rep ranges from a lower weight to a higher weight the fastest is the #1 most important metrics to know. Am I putting on lean tissue? Am I progressing as fast as I possibly could? Everything else is just, those are the tests that you always come back to find out what works best. So again, I'm going to give you a range, but in general, I say too with everything else, don't be married to any amount, because this is what happens. You get people that are they associate themselves with low volume, and then maybe instead of 1 set, 2 set maybe actually does work better for them, or if they're a trainer of their client, or even God forbid 3 sets. So again, you're going to have some wiggle room in there where there's a little bit of an individual component, but just avoid the extremes, and please don't trademark yourself as I'm a HIIT guy, I'm a high volume guy. What you should be is, especially if you're an individual or if you're a trainer, is I'm a as little as possible to produce maximal results guy. Because if I can produce the best results with as little as possible, that's also going to minimize fatigue, and that's also going to hang on to orthopedic stuff for a longer period of time. Your joints will last longer, you'll be able to train longer. It's not just about what puts on the most muscle in a 12-week study. It's what allows me to keep training hard and progress as long as I can for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And there's not going to be a whole lot of studies that show that. So anyway, then nerds get all worked up about what qualifies as a body part. Should I count rear delts? And if I'm doing back work, my rear delts are working. Should I look at that as rear delt volume? And people that really, I've never, again, being this is my living, I've never put so much effort into thinking what qualifies as how do I track volume? I've heard people doing like half metrics. Well, when I do direct rear delt work, I count that as a set. But if it's like a row, then I only count that as half of a set. And I'm adding all that up to make sure that I'm just do something, test it, and see what progresses faster. So if we want some recommendations, this is why I kind of have a broader range. This is per body part per week, somewhere between 1 and 16. Most people, because that'll make your head hurt, maybe somewhere more like between 4 and 12. And so I put these ranges of because I've had plenty of people, not just elite athletes, not just people on PEDs, that there are circumstances where people can progress on 1 set per week per body part. And I don't care what all the reasons are for it, but I've seen it happen based on large demographics of people that I've trained. Now, there's other times where if I really add up, this is again the semantics of what makes up a body part. Obviously, if we're looking at back, because some people say I do 16 sets for back. Well, that can make more sense if you're actually including, I do direct erector work, I do direct lat work, I do direct mid-back rhomboid trap parts. And when it gets to the point where you're trying to actually maybe bias different tissues, I think for lats, it makes sense maybe to have 1 pull down and 1 row. So if you're starting to add that stuff up, this is why I think sometimes, depending on how people qualify a body part, you could see that higher volume making a little bit more sense. But for most people I've seen focusing on how you do things, do it with better form, do better exercise selection, and train harder, and starting on the lower end makes everything a little bit easier to show and document progressive overload. Because again, all other things being the same, take your favorite exercises, standardize your form, or even have your form get better. And if you double the amount of weight that you can do now for your current reps, you will be bigger. There's no way around it. So that's the volume. See, it's so easy now, it's all done. And lastly, we've got a document over here. Look at Ur's glorious hair flowing in the wind. Ooh. Why is it when he's holding still? I can tell you right now, he was just moving at the elbow here, just training triceps. But his hair is always glorious and flowing. Urs, if you're watching, which I know you are, he even added more. So his current hair was like up here and flowing even more this last year at the Olympia. That has nothing to do with nothing, but you're welcome for the free drawings. I guess all this is free. The free drawings are a bonus. All right, what do we have next? Rest time. This is a short one. No pun intended, the short one. This will just take a minute. Another one. Is that a dad joke? Is that okay? I got a smirk out of Trevor. I don't know, here, that's not funny on the way home. In general, the longer the better. That's what she said. And the workout duration is always a factor. So I'm gonna get that into a minute. So basically, most research now will show that longer is better, with a little asterisk or caveat, if that's the right use of the word caveat. I just wanted to say it. I think it's the right use of it. Is that if you can have the same results in a shorter period of time, you should always opt for that. And so all I mean by that, what you're gonna say is, if I'm gonna put a time frame here, and there's some of this is body part specific, so if you think you need the same amount of rest between working sets of hack squats and working sets of forearm curls, you're doing something wrong. You're either way too serious about your forearm curls or not nearly serious enough about your hack squats. But I like this duration here. The longer, the better, because all you really, again, how do we test this? test your sets. Like, so if I do 90 seconds rest today on hack squats, I try and keep as many variables the same, and I do 3 minutes and try each one for maybe a 6-week period of time. And which one do you have a better performance, literally meaning which one do you do more reps or more weight or whatever with better control. And if you find a place where it doesn't make a difference, there's a tipping point. So you find out for your hacks after 2 minutes, you don't have any better performance, it seems the same, then that would be how you choose do 2 minutes as opposed to 3 minutes. But always start with longer, because really there's nothing that indicates longer rests are bad other than it not adding anything additional than shorter rests or getting to the point where it, reduces an individual's performance. So there is this notion of basically feeling warm and feeling prepped. So if you do the powerlifter thing, powerlifters, I love you. Part of powerlifters, the great part is like they literally bring like suitcases to the gym, like sometimes more than one bag. They have a gym bag. I don't know what percentage of powerlifters, but I think a lot of them have like wheels now. So they actually have like wheels because they have the best stuff. They just have the most gear and the most shit. They literally like set up a camp. Powerlifters set up camp. You got to kudos for that because they're going to do squats that day. It's going to be like an hour and a half long of just in the squat rack. So they get a little seat. They set up a little picnic. Generally their picnic involves lots of sugary things to eat during. There's chalk everywhere. There's wraps and straps for the wraps, which is great. So some powerlifters will take like 8.5 minutes rest between sets. There's going to be some point where you literally will feel less ready to do the workout or the exercise you're about to do. So don't go that long is my whole point. But there's not really any evidence or research that says resting too long has any detriment, maybe outside of you not feeling nearly as prepared. So like I said, there's outliers, and even if you do that whole thing and you find out 6 minutes works the best for you and you got the time, then do 6 minutes. This is one of these things where it's a little bit of ridiculous that people feel the need of like, what's the most current with research? And if something comes out that shows 90 seconds as opposed to 3 minutes, they feel like they have to do that. You're using research wrong. Rep ranges. So what are the considerations for rep ranges? So one is efficacy. So are we getting the maximum result from the rep ranges we're choosing? And then the same thing with rest times, efficiency. So anytime you can do the same principle, again, as little as possible to produce maximum results, anytime you can get the same result with less reps, always opt for that. How do you know? Try that first. If that works, I don't think there's any need to go for higher reps. Because again, anytime you do more reps, there's always more fatigue, and there's also gonna be more orthopedic toll. So literally, anytime you can do less reps in your warm-up, anytime you can do less reps when you're training, I honestly think all those things will lend itself to a longer career. So basically the whole goal is this is kind of a semantic thing. There's a couple other considerations. So the reason we don't go higher if we don't have to is that managing fatigue thing. Some of this is a little bit of a semantics, preference, orthopedic. I put all those together. So a lot of people will say, you'll get the nerds that say 5 to 6 is the best because of those things I just mentioned. But some people really don't like doing lateral raises or cable raises or curls or forearms for 5 to 6 for no other reason than it doesn't feel as good. Then the super nerd will just try and explain to them why they're doing something wrong, and if they're just doing things the way they should be doing, they should be fine. That's stupid. So again, yes, that stuff is important, but especially for the same reason, again, for smaller muscle groups, the fatigue management isn't as big of a deal. If a higher rep range feels better for you on any exercise, unless it's in an extreme, then do it. So meaning, if 5 to 6 on anything doesn't feel as good orthopedically, performance, whatever it is 8 to 10, 10 to 12, then do 8 to 10, 10 to 12, right? Again, this whole fatigue management thing is a very individual thing. Some of the people that I work with that are literally at the limits of that, I might actually occasionally say, I know you prefer, because you've been doing this bodybuilding thing this whole time, 10 to 12, but maybe let's try slightly lower rep ranges. See if we can get the same benefit, maybe have a little bit more fatigue going along the way. Now I include this in here just to make the nerds upset, but although I can't prove it, I have seen, and there's so many factors that go into this, even with this as control the group that I can, there are still certain instances and certain body parts that I like to include some higher rep ranges if and only if the lower to moderate rep ranges work. And I'll even use this as not a personal preference, myself as the example. My quads grow from everything. So again, when I've done just like 90% of my program, 6 to 8, my quads grow. So again, if for the vast majority of my training career, I almost never went higher than that because that worked really well. Now that being said, there's been times I put higher reps in with stuff just because me and my training partners were trying to murder each other. And I feel like, again, all other things being the same, they actually grew a teeny bit more. And there's been times when I've had clients where I'm trying to control for all the variables as much as possible and saying, okay, we're keeping traditionally in these 6 to 8, 6 to 10 rep ranges, and things grow when they grow okay. And they say, oh, let's try and incorporate some of these. Everything's still, all the other variables are there, long rests, training in close proximity to failure, but some higher rep ranges. and perceivably I've seen it produce better results. And I'm not just saying in the short term from more edema, more inflammation, more whatever. I am saying long term from an off season to stage, seeing more tissue coming to stage. So again, if you're at home and the vast majority of your programming is you're in that 5 to 10 rep range or whatever, and you're producing great results, I don't think there's reasons to incorporate higher rep ranges. But for when I say some body parts, and again, I'm gonna throw this out, someone's gonna call me out, nerd, whatever. This is the funny thing, we can make fun of people that say what we see in the trenches at some point in time and say there's no really evidence that points to that. And then 10 years later, we could actually have some really good evidence that points to that and be like, oh yeah. So this is one of those things where I don't really care too much. I'm not saying I can prove it, I'm just saying this is what I've seen. And if you want to try it at home, have at it. But delts, glutes, quads, for whatever reason, incorporating some higher rep ranges seem to work sometimes when the lower to moderate rep ranges don't work. Now again, if you're unsure, fatigue is your limiting factor, don't bother, right? Or if you're just a super nerd that's really fixated and saying he's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about, there's no evidence for that, fine, stay in your lower rep ranges, I don't care. So general recommended rep ranges, this is why I say 5 to 20. So there are times that I will include sets, generally lots of times in the form of a drop set, or sometimes just straight set that high reps. That is included occasionally with, again, individuals and within programming, but 95% of the time, I'm using 5 to 10 rep range for pretty much everything across the board. Again, with it, all of this is always trumped by preference in orthopedic. Even if I said this and you at home like doing 12 reps on everything, again, nothing drastically different is happening. There's not gonna be a study that comes out that shows over the course of a year, you know, the group that stayed at 5 to 10 put on 20 pounds of muscle, and the group that went in 12 reps only put on 3 pounds of muscle, right? If it's someone really at the limits of the fatigue, maybe we could actually document a decent amount of lean tissue difference. Intensifier technique. So again, intensifier is a term that gets used technically incorrectly all the time, but basically just anything that's more than a straight set for all intents and purposes we'll talk about here. So again, this is the thing that we've kind of already built upon this with the first video and this one as well too. Basically, the further you get in a set, the longer a set, the more fatigue. The more sets you have, the longer you have working sets, again, looking at even moving towards the end of a workout, the more fatigue you have. So really the whole thing in general with intensifiers is it's really, again, there's gonna be a balance of, am I getting the benefit? Again, the whole thing is the juice worth the squeeze. So at any time you're doing any type of intensifier, anything you're taking things past failure, drop sets, strip sets, supersets for the same muscle group, there really becomes the argument of, again, is the benefit that I'm getting worth the fatigue that's getting? So in general, this is again where we're looking at things like supersets, drop sets, shorter rest period of time also lends itself to this. So this is the other thing. Not only do you have longer sets or more sets after additional sets, but also anytime you're incorporating incomplete rest, you're also, some of that fatigue can be dealt with in a short period of time, meaning a 3-minute rest period. If you're going immediately to something else, that's really a big argument again for, yes, you can still get some stimulus, but there may be more fatigue than is necessary, even if you just waited another minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is. So again, when I say supersets as well too, I had to put this note in here. This is in reference to the same body part. So again, for antagonist body parts, this can be a great way to save time. So I'm not saying like supersetting chest and back is a bad idea. You know, supersetting chest and back, again, for not the same body part, isn't going to accumulate all that same local fatigue for the body part. So you can still do that obviously at the same time and still be very effective. The thing that's my main note here, less effective does not equal completely ineffective. So a lot of people will say that intensifiers, drop sets, things like that are just a complete waste of time. Again, if we look at the requirements for something to be effective stimulus, you can still get effective stimulus. There's no two ways around it. If I take a set and I go all the way in close proximity to failure and I stop, I make the weight lower and I go in close proximity to failure, there's still effective reps there because they're reps that are close to failure. They're going at slow speeds. The whole argument is that they, of course, if I look at a set of 10 and I go to failure and I look at those last 5 reps and I do a drop set and I look at another 5 reps, those first last 5 reps, if that makes sense, are going to be more stimulus than the 5 reps in the drop set. But just because they're more stimulus doesn't mean that these are no stimulus, right? So this really just becomes more of a balancing of, is it, again, the juice worth the squeeze? Is it effective stimulus for the fatigue? And at the end of the day, it really kind of has to be individual dependent. So what's the benefit of doing these things? It saves time. That's the biggest thing. There's no magic benefit that comes from supersets, drop sets, cluster sets, extended sets, whatever it is, mechanical drop sets. It's just basically a way to save time and still get to a point, if you're hitting a failure point at the end of it, just get effective reps. But the balance is, comparing even just a straight set to another straight set that would already be less effective because it's the next set, these probably even have more fatigue that go along with it. So again, It has to be individual specific. It can be exercise specific as well too. So meaning, again, if you're the individual that's nowhere near fatigue really being a limiting factor in your training, it's not a big deal. So if you're the bro that goes and trains, you do 3 exercises for biceps and triceps. On your last bicep and tricep exercise of each day, you do a little double drop set, fine. And I would argue for most of those people comparing, had you not done that set altogether, that's probably actually more stimulus the way you're doing, and the little bit of additional fatigue that you're getting isn't going to throw the rest of your program off. Now, again, and I'm also saying, again, exercise specific as well too. So again, doing a double drop set on a set of hack squats is going to have a whole lot more fatigue than I'm doing my wrist curls, and then at the end of doing a 20-pound dumbbell, I grab a 10 and do 5 more, right? That fatigue that comes with that isn't probably going to throw off the entire rest of your program or affect the rest of your training so much. So all that being said, I do totally agree with the idea that they should be used sparingly, and there's never really a need to use them. You could do straight sets your entire lifting career and get absolutely yoked, never needing to do a drop set. And there are specific times and specific individuals when you should avoid them, when you have a harder time dealing with fatigue or you're already at those limits. So if stress is high, sleep is low, nutrition is garbage, you're in a very large deficit and or for in a large deficit for a long period of time. So this is why, if you looked at information I put out with people that I've prepped and how I do their programming, like most of the time, any single person I've ever prepped, once they get inside of 8 weeks, they're almost never doing anything that would qualify as an intensifier. It's all straight sets, and I've always taken it out for the reason is, again, at that point in time, the fatigue is not worth the stimulus training. So again, any point in time, you could always look at it, and this is kind of a reductive argument, but any point in time someone does a drop set, even if I give that example for the guy that just did the drop set at the end of his bicep and tricep workout, couldn't he just done 2 more sets of biceps and 2 more sets of triceps with a longer rest? Yeah, but it takes 6 minutes longer. He's got to get into his car and post about his workout and tell you how awesome it is and get a picture real quick while he's got a good pump. So again, for time saving, or if you just like the pump, remember I talked about in the beginning, video 1, in case you missed it, you can have different training goals. So you can want to get huge and also like getting a pump. Yes, nerds, we know that the pump in and of itself is not important maybe for hypertrophy, but they're still awesome. And sometimes you can do very effective training, incorporate some things that get you a little pump, and still get yoked and still enjoy posting yourself more pumped than you would be if you just done straight sets. So at the end of the day, use your brain, you're in charge, and you can do a little bit more of that decision-making all on your own. The last slide here really from kind of like a programming standpoint is this notion of also having physique balance. So all that I say with this, with longer sessions, which happen with full body, half body for sure, even push-pull lower, is let's say at the end of an upper day, you're always doing it. And again, for good reasons, you start with the bigger movements first, the heavier loads first. You do your back, you do your chest, and then what comes after that? Arms, maybe forearms, maybe delts. Same thing with leg day. You're doing your bigger motions first, and then maybe obviously you finish with calves. Whatever is getting trained last is getting less stimulus than what trains first. And again, at the end of the day, if your goal is just to be as large of a monstrosity as you possibly can be, and maybe you don't mind looking just like a refrigerator, you don't really need to consider this. But if at the end of the day, you're training to look pretty, your version of pretty, meaning, yes, I want to put on 30 pounds of muscle, but I like this idea of being balanced, then at some point in time, this can be one of the shortcomings of this program, unless you have really good genetics for your extremities, is again, you can have what happened to me, like I joke, is look like a refrigerator, and that needs some specialization. And so I say that one of the simple ways that you can address this is actually using that as a part of your A-B rotation. So within an A part of your program, meaning, again, going over the split, if I have a full body and a full body, or even different phases, maybe block 1 or block 2 of your programming, you go from one where you're starting with all your bigger movements first, but having either a B rotation or even certain block of your programming where you're starting with smaller groups first, still training the bigger motions next, as long as they basically don't take away from what's coming after. And all I mean by that is, I wouldn't put triceps probably before bigger, heavier pressing. So if I have a tricep day, I wouldn't do all my triceps really hard and then try and do some overhead pressing, do some chest pressing. I'd rather do something like, okay, before pressing, maybe I'll do something smaller like calves. So even if you still want to follow maybe something more like a half body, which if you missed video number 1, is a really, really great place to start for the perfect program on paper for a lot of people. That's one of the ways that you can kind of overcome not having your physique start to get very out of balance, is by, again, an A-B rotation or even different blocks of your programming where you're strategically putting smaller stuff first. And all that being said, so we've gone through all the variables. Let me scroll back to the beginning and then we'll go back somewhere else after that. But looking through all the variables, now you know all the variables to make the perfect programming. We know what frequency is great. We know the most important variable even beyond what's on paper. We know the perfect number of exercises. We know the best exercises to choose. We know how to sequence those exercises. We know how close to failure to train. We know what volume to use. We know the rest time. We know the rep ranges. We know what to do with intensifiers. We even know how to prevent our physique from becoming imbalanced. And now you're sitting there and you're like, Joe, that all sounds great, but I'm confused. What do I do? How do I put that onto the program? Don't worry, I've got you. I made the optimized hardcore half body. If you didn't see my sales pitch at the end of the other video, here it is. And this is a name that I think should appeal to everybody. My strategy here was, so I'm gonna let you in on my mental manipulation occurring. Optimize, this is for you nerds. So you're like, ooh, optimize, I like the sound of that. But right now there's some meathead that's like, oh, optimize, I don't like the sound of that. But then right after that, I say hardcore. And they're like, all right, well, I don't like optimize, but I like that hardcore. That kind of sounds a little bit more up my alley. It's for both of you. And so anyway, I have created an epic program that basically puts all those variables together, addresses all those little things that I said, and what I think the on-paper part is the perfect program. I'm gonna say it again here, even though I'm trying to sell this program, I'm gonna put it back on you. If you train like a cupcake, your form is not good, you don't train intensely, you train 8 reps short of failure, don't waste your money on this program because on paper is not as important with how you do things. And there's really nothing super magical about this. I'm really the worst salesman ever, but it's a really, really, really solid program. And if you do all the other stuff right, you can get yoked with this very efficiently. And if you get this program, it's on my app, you get access to all this other sweet stuff as well too. So I have 25 plus full programs on there. I have 2 other half body options. I got full body, I got push pull lower variations, I got body part specializations. I have programs I use for people, I don't even put them here on purpose. I have a bunch of Terrence's programs. Look how pretty he looks. If you do his programs, you'll look exactly like that. As long as you have the exact same parents as he did, the exact same genetics, and the exact same life experiences. But anyway, I've gotten sidetracked. The sales pitch is supposed to be quick. I watched a sales class once on Instagram from a sales master. But anyway, if this sounds awesome to you and you are interested, there's a link in the bio down below to get early access to this. So this program's not out yet. I'm dropping it on Black Friday, and you can be the first one to access it, even maybe a day earlier than everyone else. Shh, don't tell anybody, join the waitlist. And also you get access to everything for by far the lowest prices of the year. And this is the only time that I say that because Black Friday is legitimately the lowest prices and the cheapest time to join my app for the year. And if you put your email in that bio down below, you'll be the first to know. If you're watching this like 6 years from me filming this, don't worry, this program's still on there. You just don't get the Black Friday discounts, but I'll replace the link down there. I'm pointing down there, it's below the TV, but on your screen, it's down there. And you can get huge. And yes, I'm trying to sell you stuff. I'm a trainer, I sell training, relax. If you don't like me selling stuff, then you must get mad when you drive up and down the street and you see billboards and grocery stores and gas stations. You hang out the window, why are you trying to sell me gas, you salesman? It's the same thing, relax. Anyway, that's me signing off. This is a really good sign off and a really good sales pitch. See you guys next time.